So I've been playing Dungeons & Dragons as a Dungeon Master on and off for about the last 4 years. And when I started playing as a Dungeon Master, all the friends I was playing with were also brand new to the hobby. So I didn't really have anybody to go to ask Dungeon Master advice other than YouTube, which I used before my first session. And today, this video, I just want to talk about the 10 things I wish I knew before I ran my first D&D session, in the hopes that one of you watching this, whether you're going to play your first session, your second session, or you're just relatively new to being a Dungeon Master, that you can take what I've learned and maybe get some confidence from the things I'm about to say. And if you're an experienced DM, maybe you can, in the comments, second a lot of these, or if I've missed one, or if there's something you think that is important to know, you can comment those below for all those new people who are getting into the hobby fresh. So first, you don't need to know all the rules. I do recommend that maybe you play the game as a player for a few sessions, maybe for an entire campaign, before you run the game as a Dungeon Master, because that will give you all the understanding of the rules and mechanics that you need to run a successful game as the Dungeon Master. You don't even have to do that. You can read up on the rules in the Dungeon Master's Guide, but it's an entire textbook of rules. So don't feel like you have to learn everything, because you don't. 2, you don't need to know every detail of the adventure or the world that you are running adventures for. One thing Dungeon Masters are in charge of is the world of the game. And world building is a very fun activity. It's one of the things I love about being a Dungeon Master. But it can be very overwhelming, especially if you have a lot of big ideas. So when it comes to running your first D&D session, focus on the area of the world, maybe the town, or even just the singular location the players are going to be mainly involved in. Work out those details, and you can worry about the details of the rest of the world later. And that applies to the adventure as well. Focus on the first goal, the first kind of milestone of that adventure, the first few encounters, and don't worry too much about all the other encounters after it that are going to happen through the entire campaign. Pace yourself and work on those as the players progress through the adventure. As long as you're one session ahead of your players, they're not going to know the difference that you haven't prepared everything yet. Really, that's where the magic happens. Number 3, feeling nervous is normal. I still get butterflies in my stomach when I run games, even for people I've been playing with for years. And to me, that's just a signal that you care enough about the campaign that you want it to go well. And if it's a new campaign, or it's a new group you're playing with, and especially if it's your first session running the game as a Dungeon Master, you're going to feel a bit nervous. It's normal. Take a step back, take a breath, and go into it and have fun. Number 4, if you get stuck, make something up. It's all pretend anyway. So if you get to a point where you're not really sure what to do, just throw in a little bit of improv. It's one of those skills all Dungeon Masters kind of have to have. You don't have to be super good at it, but just make something up to get them back on track. But I promise you, your players probably aren't going to tell the difference between something you prepared and something you made up on the spot. Number 5, when you're setting the scene, describe the problem or the threat last. And the reason for this is because if you start with the action your players need to take, then they're just going to be thinking about how they go about taking that action, and they're not going to be listening to you as you describe the turrets and the balcony of this tavern. They're just going to see the brawlers, and they're going to think, let's dive in and get the fight going on. So you want to have them take everything in first, the scenery, the ambiance, whatever's going on, and then say, oh, by the way, in this beautiful tavern, there is a brawl happening. And you end with that, and that jumps into your encounter. Number 6, when your players want to do something, ask them how they do it and why they're doing it that way. And the reason you want to do this is because you don't want players saying, oh, can I make a perception check for this thing? No, what you want them to do is describe to you what their character does, how exactly they go about accomplishing the thing that they want to do. So they tell you how, and then you ask them, why are you doing it that way? What is the outcome you expect from doing it in this particular manner? Your players tell you, okay, so I want to go up to the door and I start picking the lock with my thieves' tools. Okay, great. Why do you want to pick the lock? Well, I want to get into the room secretly. I don't want to make a big noise by smashing the door in, because we're trying to stealth our way through this mansion that we're in, or whatever. And so now you can say, okay, well, then make this particular skill check as you go into this action. Or you can even tell them, okay, you do this and that, and you successfully pick the lock. Because that brings us to our next point. Number 7, don't ask for a skill check unless failing means the player cannot try it again. The idea here is that if your players can just roll and roll and roll again and again and again until they succeed on the skill check, then there's not really a point for them to roll in the first place. On the other hand, if they're trying to pick a lock and there's a monster barreling down the hallway at them, They only have the one chance to pick the lock before the monster reaches them, and they have to engage the monster in combat or try to get away, or else they'll get hit. And so, in that instance, it's time sensitive. Failing means they won't get another chance at picking that lock until the monster is dealt with. And that gives failing more weight, and it's much more fun for your players anyway. Number 8, combat takes longer than you think. And I know if you've been a player for a while, you know combat can take a while in Dungeons & Dragons. I'm telling you, if you've never been a Dungeon Master, it takes even longer. And the reason for this, I think, is because, when I noticed that when I play and combat is happening, I do try my best to pay attention to combat as it goes around, but I kind of zone out when it's not my turn. When you're a Dungeon Master, you are always up in front during every single turn of every single round of every single combat. And so you're in it for everything. All the monsters, all the players, you see it all. So, combat in your brain is perceived to take even longer because you are fully engaged with it the entire time. And I say this to let you know that if you have like 5 combats planned for a single session, you may or may not get to every single combat that session. Now, if you are okay with not getting to everything you've planned for, great. Otherwise, just plan for less. Number 9, don't give your players tons of loot. It's very tempting, especially as a new DM, to try to be the cool DM and give your players tons of gold and tons of magic items, and that can be a lot of fun. But what I've noticed in my years of playing this game is that players who get a ton of loot, especially at the very beginning, all these cool magic items, tend to take it for granted. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Maybe that's the playstyle you want to have. But there does come a point when your players have piles and piles of gold and they don't really know what to do with it, then loot becomes less special. And for me, that takes the fun out of that aspect of the game. Number 10, and this is one of the most important ones, take note of the significant events that happen during each session. And you can take these notes either as they happen or immediately following the session. And you can be the one to take these notes, or you can have one of your players take these notes, as long as the notes get taken and they're taken the same day as the session. And the reasoning behind this, for me anyway, is that I have a problem with short-term memory at times. So if I wait till the next day to recount what happened during the session, I'm going to have a hard time with it. And then when the next session comes around, sometimes weeks later, because scheduling is hard, then I don't remember what happened. And that makes setup for the next session much harder. So take notes either in real time or immediately following the session, and your life will be a lot easier. Let me know in the comments if any of these have helped you, if you feel better about your first session coming up, and thank you so much for watching.